Hello, today we're making a Heroes of Might and Magic 3 map, so stick around. For those of you that don't know, Heroes of Might and Magic 3 is a turn-based strategy game from 1999, where you play as a tiny hero on a tiny horse, gathering resources and building armies. And that's all you need to know, let's get building. I knew I wanted the base to be hexagonal, and when our previous square had been appropriately hexagonal, then it was time to start planning the layout of the build. I knew that the center of the base would be home to our little town. And on the right hand side I thought it would look cool to have some water. Of course a couple of mountains would be thrown in here and there, and finally some roads. They kind of looked like a really jolly fellow dancing around. When I was done with my super duper detailed plan, then I started to focus on the water, so I cut away a small amount of XPS foam to make the ocean area a bit lower than the land. Then a couple of rocks that I'd made out of XPS foam was attached by using some hot glue. I also saved a couple dribbles of hot glue, and if you wanna know why, then stick around. The water in the map was done using a technique I learned from a YouTube channel called Mark Lean of Sweden. The basics of the technique is that you apply a couple of layers of toilet paper using some watered down PVA glue. Then you simply reshape the toilet paper using a brush to create some waves. But the most important part of this technique is that you never use the last piece of toilet paper to create the toilet paper ocean unless you have any more to spare, because otherwise disaster might strike. Ain't no mountain high enough, as Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell said during their 1967 hit song with the same name. But these tiny mountains that we're making, they're standing approximately 3 centimeters tall, or 1.18110236 inches. And when the 1.181100236 inches mountains were done, then it was just a question of gluing them down to the base where I had made some markings. A big part of Heroes of Might and Magic 3 is to collect resources that you use to build and buy things with. And those resources are gold, wood, ore, mercury, sulfur, crystalline gems. And to create a nice well-rounded map, I'll try to add as many resources as possible, starting with this ore pit, where you get ore. I dug out about 1 millimeter, or like this many inches, of the incredibly jolly looking road, so I could add some hobby sand by using some PVA glue to make it look like a gravel road. Then the base was done, for now at least, and it was time to make our little town. For those unfamiliar, in the original release of Heroes of Might and Magic 3, you could play as one of 8 different towns, with each town having different heroes and armies. And my 2 personal favorites were Tower and Rampart, and for this build, I'm gonna make Rampart. And you might be asking yourself, why Rampart? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here we go. Beautiful mountains and forests too, as far as the eye can see. Wood elves and dwarfs living side by side, with dragons and this walking tree, I guess. Don't know if the units are any good, but that doesn't matter to me. Doesn't matter to me. As long as they're cool, I don't really care. Walking tree. Alright, no. Echo. Still on. Check. Yeah, that's better. Thank you. Next up, it was time to make a subterranean gate, which is kind of like a portal to the under... Actually, you know what? Hello, and welcome to Underneath the Table, with me, your host, Mr. Host. In case you're unfamiliar with the subterranean gate, it's basically a portal that lets you travel to the underground part of the map. So I thought it would be fun to sculpt it underneath the table, but now that I say it like that... Hello and welcome to Back at the Table. The gate started out looking like a little chess pawn of clay that I gave a really rough rock texture. Then I attached 2 little clay ropes, one being wrapped around its head and the other one being attached across the top of it. Perhaps the most prominent features of the gate, besides looking quite phallic, is its quite menacing looking humanoid skull face. I gave the mouth, which is a structure's entrance, some really big canine teeth before erecting 2 big rocks on its left-hand side that I gave some rock texture using a real rock. And speaking of erecting stuff, the most penile part of the entire thing that can only be described as rock solid was attached, and then the gate was done. Next up, it was time to make a tiny ship. So I looked through all the leftover foam pieces on the table until I found the perfect one. Since we have water on our map, I thought it would be appropriate to also have a shipyard. And for those that doesn't know, a Hello? Hello, where did you go? Oh my god. What the hell is wrong with you? You can't just disappear. People are watching. But I was just getting the Does it look like I can't get back to it? And then when the shape was starting to look a bit more like a boat, then I added some thin strips of cardboard to create the hull of the ship. And when the cardboard was in place, then I poked some texture onto the boat to make it look a bit more like wooden planks. The ship that we're making is kind of like a work in progress. It's supposed to look like it's under construction. So the final thing to add before the ship was done was some supporting logs on each side. And you know, every once in a while we could all use some supporting logs to keep balance in our own lives. I made a couple of other things off camera, including a windmill to give you random resources, an alchemist lab for +1 mercury, and a redwood observatory, as well as some other stuff. Do you remember when I said, and if you wanna know why, then stick around. Well, here we are, and now I'm gonna use the dried dribbles of super glue to create some crystals. I basically just cut the dried glue into some smaller pieces with a pointed tip, and then I attached the smaller pieces together with some super glue. And I really like how they turned out. Since I wanted the map to have a lot of trees, well then it was time to make a lot of trees, because trees doesn't grow on trees, I guess. I cut out a whole bunch of small pieces of aluminum wire before applying a healthy amount of superglue to them. Then the aluminum wires were covered with some different kinds of flock. Every tree got covered with 2 layers to make them a bit thicker, and I tried to switch up the different flocks I used on them so they wouldn't all look the same. And I realized that I probably should have the glove on the hand that squishes and pokes on the superglue. And if you're wondering how many trees I made, well, let's just say I made a few. And when I was done making all the tiny trees, well, then it was time to then it was time to paint. I started out by painting the sides of the base red to represent the borders on the screen that you see in the game. Then all the land area were painted with a black base coat before it was time to focus on the water. Since I had never tried to make water like this before, I wasn't entirely sure how it would work out. But when I had painted the first layer of dark blue, then I added some lighter shades of blue closest to the shore and worked my way up to pure white that was applied in small amounts. The most important part to make it look like water was to cover the entire thing with a couple of layers of gloss varnish to make it really shiny. And I have to say that I'm really happy about the way the water turned out. Since grass is the native terrain for Rampart, the majority of all the land would be covered in it. The only exception would be a small part with some brighter yellowy flock where the subterranean gate would be standing, as well as adding a really nice beach of sand where I would place the shipyard. When I was done adding flock to the base, then I started to paint all of the other little things that I'd made. Purely looking at only the aesthetic part of the game, Heroes of Might and Magic 3 has always been one of my absolute favorites. So I was looking quite carefully at reference photos, because I wanted to try and capture the feeling and the colors of the game as close as possible. Safe to say that I'm a product of my time, but I just love the way a lot of games from the late 90s look. I truly feel like there was something special going on back then. But then again, nostalgia is one hell of a drug. When all the small separate pieces had been painted, then it was time to assemble everything. I realized that Rampart is actually standing on a small elevated square, so I made one off camera. Some greenery were added in between all of the mountains, as well as some other places on the map, before it was time to attach all of the trees. I want to take the remaining part of the video to thank all of you that have been watching my videos and liking them, commenting and sharing them. It means so much to me, you have no idea, so thank you so much for that. And if you have ideas of things that you would like to see me build, then perhaps leave it in the comments. I won't promise anything, because I already have my own list that is really long of things that I want to make. So, but who knows, leave it in the comments and we will see. Anyways, thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. I hope you liked it, and if you didn't, then I have no idea why you're still here, but thank you anyways. So, without any further ado, here is the final results.